Hey, Chris and Mariel and everyone at Grow Church, John Finkelde. So good to be with you today. And even though I can't be with you in person, it's marvelous to connect over this wonderful thing called the internet. And I want to jump straight into the Bible, and we're going to be talking about how to complete a journey well. And I'm going to go into one of the most amazing stories, I think, in the book of Acts, where Luke seems to take what I would call an inordinate amount of time to talk about Paul's journey to Rome. It's a very lengthy passage of scripture, and I'm not going to read every part of it, but I want to jump in and I want to help you on your journey of walking with Jesus. And I think especially in this bizarre, surreal, sad season that we're living through. A lamentable season in a lot of ways that I find at times I've found felt myself very flat through this season, and other times going, okay, Lord, what are you doing? And it's been a roller coaster ride. And I want to take you into this journey with Paul and give you some ideas, I think, on how to walk this journey with Jesus in such a way that we arrive, like Paul eventually did, at his destination in Rome. So I'm jumping into Acts chapter 27, reading right from the very start, verse 1. When it was decided that we will sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. And here Paul, who has been in jail in Israel, jailed and accused of all sorts of things, appealed to Rome, and now he's going on his Mediterranean cruise. Well, not much of a cruise, but he's now going to Rome to face Caesar. Because as a Roman citizen, he'd appealed to a higher court in Caesar, and so he starts his journey. Verse 2, we boarded a ship from Adretium and about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day he arrived at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. I love the fact that at the very start of this journey, we see the value of friendship. One of the brothers traveling with him, and Luke was obviously there because you can hear the word we put out to sea. We boarded a ship. Aristarchus was with us. And so Luke is in this journey. He's in this story. And of course, Luke is referred to multiple times by Paul. In 2 Timothy 4, he talks about at the end of his life, only Luke is with me. Luke was a wonderful friend over many years for Paul. Aristarchus, we also find in other parts of the book of Acts that he was a co-laborer with Paul, working alongside Paul to plant and establish churches. So we find two friends on the ship, but also when they arrive at Sidon, it says Julius, in kindness, that's the centurion, allowed Paul to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. You know, I don't think you can do the journey of the Christian life by yourself. I've been following Jesus for over 40 years now, and I've discovered that you cannot walk alone. Trying to walk alone doesn't work. You're eventually going to stumble and fall, and who's going to be there to help pick you up? It's going to be family, it's going to be friends, it's going to be people that you've walked with. And I love the fact that Paul at the start of this journey is leaning strongly on Aristarchus. He's leaning on Luke. He's leaning on his friends at Sidon. When they landed there, he wanted to go and be with people who knew him, who understood him. Many times through my journey as a believer, it's friends that I've reached out to in times of need. It's friends I've rung up and said, hey, can we just talk? I need to talk to someone. It's friends that I've rung up at other times and texted them and said, hey, pray for me. I'm in a situation that I really need the Lord's intervention. And reaching out in prayer towards friends, I think is to me not an unusual thing. It's meant to be a normal part of the Christian life. It's wonderful. Do you have a friend that you can reach out to and say, hey, could you pray for me in this situation right now that I'm in? I need the intervention of God. And maybe they'll say, sure. And while we're at it, why don't you pray for me? Because Paul refers, I think, about 1 in 4 references to prayer are Paul actually saying, hey, pray for me. I have this need, and leaning on each other. The beauty of friendship is you can call them and text them and ask for prayer, because friends are great to spend time with. And I know in this COVID season, there's been great disruption to face-to-face connections. But thank the Lord for Zoom. Thank the Lord for Skype, for Messenger, FaceTime, for WhatsApp. At least we have technology that serves us well in these days. And maybe you've had to get into aspects of technology that you wouldn't want to have otherwise, but it's a great way to connect with friends. And I think it's so important. I remember in the early stages of lockdown here in Perth that we would Zoom with friends and Zoom with our family until we were able to meet with them, just to maintain friendship and kinship and connection. So important. You can't go the journey without friends, I believe. It says there in verse 4, from there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia, and there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. And when the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete opposite Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty, came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lycia. You see through this passage, I tried to emphasize some of the words here. We made slow headway. The winds were against us. There was difficulty. The wind did not allow us to hold our course. We moved along the coast with difficulty. Part of the Christian journey is that there will be suffering. There will be pain. There will be challenging circumstances. There will be things that are tempting to take us out of the way of Jesus. There'll be things that we'll have to wrestle with, things that will come against us, things that will cause us to make slow headway, things that will be difficult. I'm quoting the passage here. The wind did not allow us. The winds were against us. And there are things against us. I mean, there is the world, the flesh, the devil. There are different ways of opposition can come to us, but I think it's vital to actually have a theology of pain and suffering as part of our theology as Christians. That we're not meant to live a life, and we can't live a life that is just all green lights, all sunshine, all glorious, everything coming easy to us. If you've had that sort of Christian life, please get in touch with me and let me know how you managed to pull that off, because I haven't. I've had various health battles, various people against me at different times in pastoral leadership. I've had various internal struggles where it hasn't been anyone outside me that's the problem. I've been my own problem. And I think it's important to know that through the phases where things are challenging and difficult and we make slow headway, that Jesus will often use these points of pressure, these points of challenge and difficulty to shape us into the person we are. I think if you're like me, the grey hair, or I like to call it platinum, the platinum generation, not grey, platinum, then you'd be like me and say, you know what, actually those troubles, those tribulations, those difficulties have shaped me. They've changed me. They've actually made me a better believer. They've made me a person who's learned how to walk with Jesus in different ways. And actually, when I look back over the decades of following Jesus, and it's pushing towards 5 decades now, I think, you know what, Lord, I want to thank you for the difficult days, the challenging days when I made slow headway and the winds were against me. And Lord, the fact that you've been faithful and hung on to me through those seasons and through those occasions, Lord, I acknowledge that in the middle of trouble and pain, you have been faithful to me and walked with me. Then I love the fact that they come to a place called Fair Havens. Isn't that cool? It must have been part of an island or a part of a land area. When you came into it, you kind of went, oh wow, this is nice. It wasn't like Disappointment Cape or Trouble Bay. It was Fair Havens, and obviously people had sailed into that. I picture a bay with beautiful rolling green hills going up from the port, and kind of a bit of music as you arrive, and the smell of even some exotic foods on the port side, and you go, oh, this is a good place to be, a place of Fair Havens. And I've found actually when I've come through times in my Christian life where there's things that are difficult, things that are against me, opposition and even struggles in my own heart, I found that I've had to look for places of fair havens, rolling green hills, exotic foods and music in different ways, if you like. But I've actually found different habits, different lifestyle decisions that have caused me to find a place of fair havens. Fair havens is a place of refreshing, a place of rest, a place of recuperating emotional energy and struggles and wrestles that you've had. I found a few different things have been my fair havens. My own prayer walk with Jesus has been a fair haven. And I'm filming this, talking to my webcam, talking to you guys today in my home study, my home office. And right over here is my IKEA chair where I love to sit with the Lord. And 5 or 6 mornings a week with coffee, absolutely with coffee first thing in the morning, I'll sit in my chair and it's just waiting on the Lord, reading the scriptures. I was saturating myself in the opening chapters of Samuel this morning. Just sat with the Lord, just sat with my hands open and just going to wait on you, Lord. I'm just going to sit with you. I'm going to sit in silence. Don't even want to particularly ask you anything. I just want to sit with you. And I found that place of devotion with the Lord, waiting on the Lord, a fair haven. Sometimes a fair haven for me has been to go for a walk, a simple pleasure. And I found I was in quarantine in March when I came back from the UK at the beginning of the season. I was basically in self-isolation at home for 14 days. And at the end of the 14 days, just to go outside for a walk, just a half an hour walk, felt like, luxury, the luxury of that. And I've actually used walking, I would say in the last, probably especially the last 10 years of my life, as being a place of fair havens, where I go for a walk and enjoy the air and the scenery, and just finding that place. Another fair haven for me has been photography. I've taken up photography in the last 15 years. I just love it. I've got a couple of cameras and love getting out, especially on holidays, and kind of hunting around and finding different places, and just a refreshing hobby. I call them positive addictions, actually, those sort of hobbies where you just get renewed and get refreshed just by being able to do that sort of stuff. My wife, one of her fair havens is she loves to knit. And so she knits garments for needy children. She knits for an organisation of blankets and jumpers and various things that are going to children in need, families in need, and it has a great outlet. But she just loves to, she finds it relaxing. Me personally, no way. Knitting would drive me crazy trying to make it do all that stuff. But she just finds it as a fair haven. What's your fair haven? What's your place that brings you refreshing and renewal? And there's no doubt in this season that we've been through, it's challenging to find fair havens, and we have to get innovative and creative to find that. But through the walk of your Christian life, through the journey with Jesus, it's important to dip into fair havens and get renewed and refreshed in your soul. Because I think care of your soul is so important through the journey with Jesus. It says that much time in verse 9 had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbour was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. There was a harbour in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. This is a really interesting juncture of the story, as they're in fair havens and they'd lost time in their journey and they were going towards the Day of Atonement around September, October. So it's heading into the Northern Hemisphere autumn season, and probably was a season where there were more storms coming through. It's heading towards winter. And Paul just has this sense that, you know what, I don't think this is going to go well. We're going to lose the ship, the cargo, and the lives. And here's a godly man giving wise counsel, giving godly advice. But listen to this, the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul had said, followed the advice of the pilot, the guy who knows the seas, the owner of the ship, who was traveling on the ship, and the harbour was unsuitable to winter in, but the majority decided, the crowd said, no, let's sail on and we'll reach Phoenix and we'll winter there. Of course, we know as the story goes on, this was not a great decision. Sometimes to listen to the crowd, sometimes to even listen to who were the experts, the pilot and the owner, who had obviously a great risk with the ship to sail on. I have seen so many times, unfortunately, over the decades of pastoring in my church, people refusing to listen to godly advice. People refusing to listen to the warnings of godly people. I just think it's so vital in your Christian life that you learn to submit to godly leadership. Now, I'm not talking about living under a dictatorship where whatever Pastor Chris says to you, you have to do. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about what Hebrews 13 talks about. It says in the King James, the old language, says, obey your leaders. Now, it's interesting when you look at that verse. I think it's Hebrews 13:17. Obey your leaders. Submit to them. The word obey is not the Greek word used for obey in Ephesians 6:1, where Paul writes and says, children, obey your parents. That word obey there is strict. Do what they say is what it means. The Greek word in Hebrews 13 where it says obey your leaders is a different word. It's the Greek word pitho, and it means to give your ear to your leaders. It's an interesting illustration, isn't it? It's basically lean towards your pastor, lean towards your church leaders and listen to them. Take heed to what they say. They're wise, they're anointed, they're godly. Listen to them, lean into what they say. I always found it very difficult when someone in our church would approach me and say, John, I just want to share with you a decision that we're making, and I just want to see what your input is and really believe God has spoken to me to do this. And they'd share the decision that they believe, but it was always with an edge of, we believe God has said this, what do you think? And I say, well, if it's the Lord speaking, what's the point of actually asking me what I think? And I would instruct people, I'd say, if you alter your language, I'll give you some feedback. And what I want to hear is not, this is what God has said, but we think it's possibly what the Lord is saying to us, but we want your godly counsel on it. I'm prepared to go, I'm happy to talk to you now. But if you're going to sit there and say, look, the Lord has spoken to me and told me to do this, and we wonder what you think, well, what's the point? You already believe God has spoken to you. I find that level of, I call it arrogance, independence. I find it not a submissive heart. It's not lending your ear to your leaders. And in fact, if the owner of the ship, Julius the centurion, the pilot, had all listened to godly advice, they would have avoided what's coming next, because what's coming next is not pretty. It gets really ugly, actually. I want to encourage you that when you're making a major decision in your life, seek godly advice. I refuse these days to make a major decision in my life without seeking godly advice. When we handed our church over 10 years ago, 8 years ago, but started our journey 10 years ago to transition our church to next generation leaders, I went to 3 different people to get a green light before I pulled that trigger. I went to Andrew Jenkins, key elder on my board. I went to Pastor Phil Pringle, the leader of our movement, Pastor Gordon Moore, the national director of Australia in our movement at that time. And I said to each one of them, this is what I believe, what Diane should do at this juncture of our ministry life. We believe it's time to hand over the leadership, do a transition journey of a couple of years, and I want to know what you think. You give me red lights, I'm not doing it. I need these green lights of these 3 leaders, godly leaders in my life, and they all gave a green light, and we did it, and it's worked out very well. I've got a major decision to make about our Grow a Healthy Church ministry at the moment. It's a significant investment financially and in time. And you know what I'm doing? I'm just making the decision all by myself. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm getting godly advice. I'm sharing it with different people and saying, what do you think I should do? I want your advice in it. And Am I asking the Lord what he thinks? Of course I am. I'm praying, saying, Jesus, guide me, lead me, speak to me. But Lord, I'm also putting it up before godly people to get their wisdom, their advice, their thoughts on it, so that I make the right decision. You got a big decision coming up? Talk to your pastor. Talk to godly leaders in the life of your church. It will help you avoid scenarios that are not going to be healthy for you. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. They weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete, and before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Corda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. I call this a life-challenging and a life-changing storm. Every now and again in your Christian life, and this is more than just that opposition and slow headway and it's difficult and challenging. I'm not talking about those general trials and tribulations. Every now and again, a storm will come that is designed to take you out, that is designed to change you forever. And in fact, it actually will challenge your very life. And Paul goes through the shipwreck, and you would have heard some of the language there, that they were driven along by the wind. They couldn't head into it as a wind of a hurricane force. And it was so bad, they were so afraid, they began to throw the cargo overboard. Now the cargo is where the owner of the ship would make money. He would be transporting import, export sort of business stuff, and when he gets and arrives, export, bang, get it out of the ship, collect the money for it, all good. Well, they're throwing money overboard basically. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard. Now, the ship's tackle is not the fishing line, folks. The ship's tackle is the sails. You are desperate. You are desperate when you're in a sailing ship and you're throwing the sails overboard. You're probably keeping a couple of spare ones, but you're going, well, we just cannot keep the weight, chuck it overboard. That's how desperate and bad they were. And here's one of my favorite verses in the New Testament. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, in Acts 27:20, the storm continued raging. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. Wow. I picture it this way of Aristarchus staggering out one morning and saying to Paul and Luke, well, we're doomed, we're done, we're finished, it's all over, we're giving up. Paul and Luke saying, man up, come on Aristarchus, get your faith together, we can get there, we're going to go to Rome. Next morning Luke wanders out and says, Aristarchus is right, Paul, we're done, we're finished, it's all over. Paul says, come on, pull yourself together, man. Next morning, Paul walks out to Luke and Aristarchus and says, you guys are right, we're finished, we're done. Luke says, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Now, Paul was the guy who wrote Romans chapter 14 about the God of hope, fill you with all hope in believing. Paul had already written Romans when this shipwreck was happening. I tell you what, but he finally, I love this verse because it helps me when I feel things are hopeless, when I feel there's a hurricane force, when there's a shipwreck happening around me, when things are falling apart. I can go, hey, Paul, you gave up hope of being saved. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but I have had dark moments in my life when I've just gone, I just don't see a way out of this. I remember over 20 years ago going through a 15-month period of deep, dark depression. A relationship with a key mentor in my life broke down, was shattered, and the ripples of it were extremely damaging, had the potential to do massive damage to our church. And I remember being so depressed in that season of I can't see a way out. It was like black right in front of me. I couldn't see light. I couldn't see the future. I even through that time had thoughts of taking my own life. How can I get out of this? And suicide started to appear in my mind as a viable option. And I remember through that season, I refused to give up the place of prayer, because I found if I sit with the Lord, then I know God can work something, maybe a miracle, I don't know. But so I refused, even as dark as it was, desperate it was. It got to the point, to be honest with you, where I could only face the next hour or two of a day. And I'd look at what was on my schedule and go, can I do that? Yeah, I can. Okay, let's do it. It got that kind of hunkered down vibe, if you like. But I kept praying. I'd go and sit before the Lord. And I wouldn't say my prayer life was active or vibrant or alive. I would just sit before Jesus and just say, Lord, help me. I don't know how to get through this. And one morning, I'm sitting with the Lord, and I wasn't feeling particularly holy or spiritual or awake to Jesus, but I had a vision just in my mind. And a hand was reaching down from heaven and was holding onto my shirt. And I was dangling like a rag doll. My arms and legs were loose and dangling, and the hand of God, I thought it was, believed it was, coming out of heaven and holding me, and I'm just dangling. And the Holy Spirit whispered to me and said, you can let go, but I never will. I'll never forget that morning, that vision, that voice of the Spirit. You can let go, but I never will. Of John, I'm hanging on to you. John, I'll get you through. It's dark. You don't know how you're going to survive, but I will get you through. I remember one day not being able to go to the office. I just sat down at our meals table and just began to bawl like a baby and told my wife how dark it was, how alone I felt. Not through any fault of her own, it was just depression. Bawled my eyes out and told her, I've thought about taking my life. She, of course, rallied the troops and friends and around me and stood with me in prayer and got me through. Jesus hung on to me. And if you're going through, and look, in today, it's not like everyone in the church is going through a shipwreck season, but you might be going through such a season that is so dark. You know what? I'm here to tell you today that even when you let go, Jesus does not let go of you. He's hanging on to you, and he will get you out the other side of this. And I love a little phrase. It's a beautiful little phrase in verse 17. It says they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. This is called in one of the translations cabling, where wooden ships could break apart in a hurricane storm like this, and so they would rope the ship. They would call it cabling. They would cable it around, literally to hold the ship together. It's a nautical term. It's only used twice in the New Testament, once here in Acts 27, verse 17, but also in Hebrews 4, where the writer to the Hebrews says that when you come to the Lord and appear before his mercy and his grace, and you cry out to him and you approach the throne of grace and ask for help in a time of need, the word help there in a time of need is exactly the same Greek nautical term used here in Acts 27, that the Lord will cable you around, that he'll wrap you around with his grace, and you'll find grace and mercy in a time of need. Do a little Bible study on it. It's in Hebrews 4, and I think it's verse 16. Could be wrong with the verse number, but it's a beautiful verse about you'll find help in a time of need from the mercy and the grace and the goodness of God. And it's the only two times this nautical word appears in the New Testament. Once here, in a shipwreck occasion, and secondly in Hebrews, that when we approach the throne, Jesus wants to wrap you. And there are people here today, you're hearing my voice, you're watching me, and I'm here to tell you that the Lord will cable you, the Lord will rope you, the Lord will hold you together through this shipwreck season. Verse 21, after they'd gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice." Don't you love that? I told you so. Should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you have spared yourselves this damage and loss, and a lot of money, a lot of loss in this. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. It's not good news for the owner, but hey, you shouldn't listen to godly advice, my friend. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong, whom I serve, and stood beside me, said, "Don't be afraid, Paul." Because when he'd given up hope, the angel turns up. "You must stand trial before Caesar. God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island." So it's kind of like, come on, guys, we're going to get through this, but we have to run aground. And the shipwreck goes on, and I won't read through it all. It's a magnificent storytelling. And they end up on this island, and the island of Malta, in chapter 28. Once safely on shore, we found out the island was called Malta. In verse 7, there was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home, showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honoured us in many ways. When we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. You know what? On the way to Rome, there are divine detours. 2020, as I think, in a sovereign way, when I pull back to 30,000 feet and look down at what God is doing, 2020 is a complete divine detour. Nothing's going on in this year that I expected would go on. It's just a bizarre, surreal, strange, sad year. But I believe in God's sovereignty over this year, that he has a divine detour for us. He's got a Malta for us. He's got a place to bring healing and strength and a reviving of people in their walk with Jesus. So even when the shipwreck happens, God has a purpose in mind. God has the gospel going forth in that situation. And I love it a bit further down in 28, Acts 28, verse 14. There we found some brothers and sisters invited to spend a week with them. And so, it's underlined in my digital Bible here on my screen, and so we came to Rome. We are going to reach our destination, church. And I mean that in a way of where God wants to take us this year in 2020. But can I just say, beyond the destinations we have on this planet, you know what my ultimate destination is to be resurrected on the day that the Lord Jesus returns. If I'm alive and awake, transformed in just a moment, the twinkling of an eye, I love that. I'm happy to be awake when Jesus returns. But I'm also, if I keep the appointment with death that every person must keep, I am looking forward to the day when I rise out of the grave. My ultimate destination for me is resurrection. I want a brand new body. No more platinum. I want a brand new body. You and I are destined for resurrection because we believe in the life and resurrection, the one called Jesus. So please let me pray for you today. Father, I'm praying for everyone here at Grow Church, that, Lord, we're on different parts of the journey. I'm praying that you would strengthen their friendships through this journey. I'm praying that, Lord, even though there is opposition and difficulty and winds against them, that they'll find fair havens, places of renewal and refreshing through this time. I pray, Lord, that they'll have an ear to listen to godly voices, the godly wisdom, godly counsel. They'll be able to hear it and listen to it. I'm praying also that those, and there may be just a small number, just one or two even, who are feeling like it's a shipwreck, that Jesus, they'll be reassured, Lord, that you will never let go of them. Because, Lord, you have divine detours in mind. You have an ultimate destination for us. And Jesus, I thank you for these folks today, that you would cause them to walk with you through every journey. God bless you, Grow Church. Great to have been with you today.